All right. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you're joining us from. Distinguished colleagues, guests, and friends of Nigeria joining us via X, LinkedIn, YouTube, and Facebook, and everyone else who believes in the promise of Nigeria. I'm so honored to be the moderator for this vital pre-summit conversation. We gather at a moment when history is pressing on us. Nigeria stands on the edge of possibilities, and we can either continue to circle around the same challenges or choose to boldly transform them into stepping stones for growth. The theme of the Nigerian Economic Summit 31 is the reform imperative, building a prosperous and inclusive Nigeria by 2030. This is not just another headline, it's a call to each of us to act, a collective challenge to make reforms real, visible, and life-changing. Why now, you may ask? Because the stakes are higher than ever. Our young population demands opportunities, our businesses need stability, our households long for dignity. Reforms are no longer optional. They are the foundation for resilience and shared prosperity. Today's dialogue is about setting the tone. It's about imagining what reforms look like, not in policy papers, but in the marketplace where young entrepreneurs hustle, in the classrooms where children dream, and in the homes where families aspire to live with dignity. It is about asking the question, can reforms become the bridge between Nigeria's potential and Nigerians' lived experience? This year's summit will focus on three pillars: reforms, resilience, and results. It will dive into five critical priorities. Number one is driving industrialization-led growth. Two is unlocking investment amid global trade shifts. Three is building infrastructure for competitiveness. Number four is advancing inclusion for shared growth. And five is strengthening institutions for sustainable impact. I'm delighted today to be joined by two outstanding voices: Mrs. Ozofu Ogiemudia, who is the co-chair of the NESG 31 Technical Subcommittee. She is the deputy managing partner of Udo Udoma and Bello Osage, and a partner in its corporate advisory, private equity, mergers and acquisitions, employment, private wealth management, and pro bono teams. She is recognized as an extremely resourceful and versatile advisor and has advised on various areas of the law, including private equity, mergers and acquisitions, corporate and commercial law, corporate restructuring and regulatory compliance, labor and employment and companies secretariat practice. She is the chairperson of the Nigerian Bar Association section on business law. She played a pivotal role in legislative reforms as the chairperson of the Technical Advisory Committee to the 8th Nigerian Senate on the drafting of the Companies and Allied Matters Act 2020. She was the thematic lead of the National Assembly Business Environment Roundtable Regulatory Working Group that was set up to assist the National Assembly in identifying and improving bills that relate to any aspect of the regulatory environment. She has served as the private sector co-chair of the Technical Subcommittee of the Nigerian Economic Summit since 2023. She has been recognized annually since 2018 by the International Financial Law Review as one of the IFLR 1000 women leaders, and since has been rated annually as a highly regarded lawyer for her mergers and acquisition and private equity practice. She is recommended as a national leader for her mergers and acquisition and governance practice by Who's Who Legal Nigeria. Please, distinguished audience, join me in welcoming Madam Ozofu. Madam Ozofu, you're welcome, ma'am.
Thank you for having me.
The next distinguished voice we'll be having on here is Dr. Wilson Erumebor, who is a senior economist at the Nigerian Economic Summit Group. He is a leading economist and a thought leader on Africa's economic transformation. He leads the work on economic transformation and competitiveness at the Nigerian Economic Summit Group, a leading think tank in Africa. Wilson has advised global institutions and government agencies, including the US Department of State and the Irish Department of Foreign Affairs, on Nigeria's economic policies. He has delivered insights at prestigious platforms such as Chatham House and the Nigerian Economic Summit, and his works has been published by the Brookings Institutions and other notable platforms. His commentary is regularly featured by global media outlets, including the BBC, Al Jazeera, and CNBC Africa. You're welcome, Dr. Wilson.
Thank you for having me.
Together, we would explore how reforms can move from promises to impacts And I'll begin this conversation by setting the stage with a few questions. And I'll start with Madam Ozofu. Madam Ozofu, the summit team speaks of building a prosperous and inclusive Nigeria by 2030. For many citizens, this may sound very aspirational. From your perspective, what would tangible real impact look like in the daily lives of Nigerians, whether it's in jobs, education, healthcare, or infrastructure, if these reforms succeed?
Thank you for this very important question. I think the question is very important because it helps us focus on, when we talk about impact, when we talk about reform, what exactly really should we be delivering? Is it just numbers, economic growth figures, GDP growth, or is it the everyday experiences of Nigerians? I think I think it's both, but I think the latter is very important. It's certainly how the bulk of the population will measure the impact of any economic reform implemented by the government. And it needs to be such that people can ask themselves the question, how does this change my everyday life? What is my everyday experience? So for instance, we read from the National Bureau of Statistics that Nigeria's GDP grew by 3.13% year on year in Q1 2025. But what is the real impact to people? Are food prices down? Are people able to power their businesses? Are they able to afford good and quality healthcare and send their children to decent schools? Is there dignity and opportunity for Nigerians, including our vast youthful population? So I think that is really how the everyday Nigerian on the street is going to measure impact. And impact has to be delivered by this reform in a way that it percolates from the top all the way to the bottom. It can't be reform or impacts that only the rich or the middle class feel. It has to be that it affects everybody, that there's improved economic security for people, that their wages stay above the rate of inflation, that parents can deliver, what they need to take care of their family with dignity, that there are job opportunities, and a way to use our population as a weapon of growth and change, not a vast amount of people that we need to find a way to just take care of, but that we can empower them through skills and education so that they can take advantage of the digital age we're in, that there's affordable living for people, that people can live in affordable and decent homes and can feed and transport themselves and run their businesses without having connection or knowing somebody, that there's access to services, healthcare, clean water, electricity, for instance, that people can move about. Transportation is not prohibitive, such that you can't move to another part of the country, either for business or for personal reasons, and that there's safety for businesses. On the news this week were some of the IDP people that were relocated and then attacked again by Boko Haram. So that sort of thing. So I think that these are the ways certainly that Nigerians will measure real impact. And I think that what NESG 31 aims to do, as the previous summits before this, is not just talk the talk, but really drill down into what does this mean in relation to infrastructure? What does it mean for economic policy? What does it mean for healthcare, for education, for gender equality at the national and at the sub-national and grassroots levels? Let me stop there.
Thank you very much, Mai. Said that it's not just number, but everyday lived experience and population as a weapon of growth and change. Let me come to Dr. Wilson. Dr. Wilson, history tells us that bold reforms often demand short-term sacrifices before delivering long-term benefits. For a country like Nigeria, where many households already struggle, how can we strike the delicate balance between taking the tough but necessary reform steps and cushioning citizens from immediate economic shocks?
Yeah, thank you. That's a very interesting question, because reforms everywhere come at a cost, as we've seen in other countries and even in Nigeria. But one thing is very clear, that good reforms make provisions for these costs. So it's not just about um, satisfying the needs, of one particular stakeholder at the expense of the other, right? So good reforms will look at what are the possible alternatives, what are the unintended consequences as a result of this policy or action, and how can we mitigate that, or manage some of these costs that would be faced by different stakeholders. And so with recent example in Nigeria, we can talk about, for instance, the fuel subsidy removal and how it was done. One can argue, and it's very clear that this was a policy that was done without proper consideration for the poor. Bear in mind that we're talking about a country with 133 million people that are multidimensionally poor. So in a case like that, a good way would have been to understand that there is a huge cost that is coming to these people, and as government, legitimately, you have the right, to be able to mitigate some of these costs and address them, just so you don't keep pushing even more people into poverty. And that's how a good reform, should be implemented. And in fact, there are other examples that we can point to, even within Nigeria, the cashless policy, Naira redesign policy, which we saw a couple of years ago, where now at the times there was scarcity of the currency, people were buying their own currency, and even we still see that happening now. So essentially, the point is, whenever some of these big reforms need to be made, right, cushioning is very important. Cushioning the people that would be severely affected, because reforms must not only be politically acceptable, they must also be socially accepted, by the people themselves. And you all know that without, proper safety nets, for people, for citizens, reforms, tend to collapse, and or they face so much pressure, as we're seeing now, from the citizen. The other is on sequencing. By sequencing, I mean looking at how you pace these reforms in a way that you don't put so much burden on key stakeholders like the household, for instance. And we must know that citizens cannot afford, to absorb multiple shocks at the same time, right? And given the premise that many of these people are, many of our citizens are, multidimensionally poor, it just means that whenever such reforms need to be considered, right, they need to be properly sequenced in a way that the impact would be somewhat felt, mildly on the people. I mean, just look at 2023 alone. We've had, Naira redesign policy, we had FX policies, with a fluctuating exchange rate, we had the elections, we had fuel subsidies, all of these happening at the same time and pushing so much pressure on the citizens. I mean, if we look at other countries, Indonesia, for example, when they were removing their fuel subsidy, I mean, they used a gradual approach of removing fuel subsidies, but at the same time, pairing that with, cash transfers under the BLT program that, you know, targeted poor households, and those that will be severely affected by these reforms. And so I think, first of all, cushioning is very important. Secondly, sequencing of these reforms. And finally, which I think is very, very important, is building trust. You know, we cannot see, government cannot say people should adjust, and it's not adjusting itself. And Nigerians must be able to see that the government is adjusting. You're making adjustments. How do you explain carrying this heavy subsidy burden, putting that on the people, whilst we've not seen any major or radical reforms to reform the budget, to amend the budget, to ensure that monies are used judiciously, to ensure that projects that deliver on the people are prioritized, monitored, and efficiently delivered in terms of cost, and value to the people. Just look at the 2025 budget, for instance, and so many things are there, that so many items under agencies that should not be doing that. You would see an agency that is supposed to, support small businesses, have a line item like buying SUVs for chiefs, you know. So many things that you look at and you're wondering how come the government is living large in terms of we have a large budget, but at the same time we're not seeing that much impact on the people. And so reforms must be very holistic. They must build trust in the way that we prioritize what matters to the people. And I think within that conversation, transparency is very, very important, right? If you go through the website of the budget office, for instance, the last budget implementation report you would see is for 2024 Q3, which is like last year, the third quarter of last year. We've had the fourth quarter of last year, we've had the first quarter of this year, we've had the second quarter of this year. There is no budget implementation report uploaded on the website of the budget office. How do we even know what monies are being used for? And by the way, the Fiscal Responsibility Act, of 2007 states that this implementation report should be provided not later than 30 days after the end of each quarter, right? So we've done how many days now? We still don't know what these monies are being used for, what are the key performance indicators for the budget. And so citizens, what we want basically is coherence, that this sacrifice has to be collective. It's not a one-sided thing. And let me just conclude this point by saying that we are running out of time, as a country. We're in a country where I always quote these statistics, especially because I think it's really, really important that 66% of our household say that they cannot afford healthy food, in 2024. That's last year. And this is data from the NBS. That's two out of three households cannot afford healthy food. 48% of households say they had to skip a meal because they don't have money. That's almost half of your household. 48% cannot eat because they don't have money. So I think we're running out of time. Just look at what's happening in Nepal, and all of that. So, and this is not just about elections, right? It is just about avoiding the possible social, disruption that could happen if you have a large population, a large number of your population not eating healthy, not gainfully employed. I think that's some disaster that we should avoid.
Indeed, we are running out of time. And it's quite interesting that you mentioned the subject of trust, because I'll come to Madam Ozofu now and ask a question related to trust. Trust is a recurring deficit in our Nigerian governance space at the moment, as citizens often doubt whether reforms will be sustained. From your perspective, what confidence-building measure should NESG 31 put forward to restore trust between the government and the people?
Thank you very much. I think, first of all, the fact that NESG 31, as other previous summits before this, is the collaboration between the government and the private sector. I think that's a good thing, because it means we're not just as citizens talking to ourselves, but we have the government in the room. We have the president opening the summit. We have the vice president closing day 2. We have captains of industry like Alhaji Dangote giving the keynote. We have representatives of the international community. So we have all stakeholders in the room, as well as our thought leaders, etc. So I think that the fact that it is a forum for private and public sector, local and international players, means we try to bring all views into the room. I think that in relation to the trust deficit, it's already been well said. It exists. Even for those of us that are not in the maybe below the poverty line, we still struggle to trust. The government needs to, I think they need to do more to constantly demonstrate that while bold reforms are being implemented, they're implemented sincerely, which means there is a genuine interest to see it through. I think that if we, like the challenge of this summit, which is building a prosperous and inclusive Nigeria by 2023, so that gives us 5 years to demonstrate sincerity of purpose and impact. Just imagine if these reforms are sustained and they are funded, they are implemented with sincerity of purpose over the next 5 years, you will see that percolation that I mentioned all the way down to the multidimensionally poor. The problem is that sometimes you hear about the reform and there is that initial implementation, but either it's not sustained or it's not sincerely implemented. We also need to see that these reforms will survive transitions of government. It needs to be over a long-term period because it is a marathon. It's not a sprint. So it's going to take time. And, given the state of the country, we are a nation that's over 60 years. We have grown from where we were at independence. We've grown in the size of population exponentially. We've also gone through phases that should have made us a more mature economy if we had been doing things right. But it is never too late to start. So let's just say we've started. There's so many reforms that are currently in the process. There's more to come with the tax reforms that are coming, and I'm sure that's not the last. So we need to see that these reforms are being implemented, and that the pain of reform is being borne by all of us. So bear the pain now, and then we'll enjoy it later. It cannot be that it is only certain people that are feeling the pinch. We all need to be feeling the pinch together so that we know that we will all enjoy the benefits together. So in terms of boosting trust, transparency, as has already been said, if we cannot see how the budget is being implemented, how do we know? I also think communication. People need to understand why. Sometimes I talk to, so for instance, maybe in the salon, talk to my hairdresser or something, and then I can remember when the fuel subsidy was removed, and she kept asking, will they take it back? And I told her, take it back to what? It can't go back. We're moving forward. It's not going to, people were still dreaming that they wake up one day and the government will just announce that fuel is 600. It's not going to happen. So I think that the communication needs to be such that people understand why are we going through this? Where are we heading? If they understand, they will buy in. I think everybody knows that there needs to be structural changes made. They just need to understand why did petrol go up? Why has power cost gone up? Why are all these things happening? And what are we working towards? So that's communication. I think there needs to be independent monitoring. I think the government needs to be open and transparent about what they're doing and willing to engage with think tanks, with civil society, with anyone that is keeping an eye on things, questioning things. I think government needs to be open to responding to questions and criticisms and taking them in the right spirit. And I think that there needs to be a lot of collaboration, and it's the same messaging from federal, states, local. We have to have bought into the same ideology. So it's not that the federal government is trying to change. We need the subnationals are such a powerful base that if the governors, regardless of political affiliations, are all working towards that same objective or vision, we will see it translate not just from the federal, but also to the states and to the local level. But I'll also go back to that issue of institutions, which is one of the sub-themes of the summit. We need strong institutions. And I think we've all witnessed the weakening of the institutions that should hold guard and safeguard the trust of the population. So, for instance, do we have confidence that justice will be delivered by the courts? Do we have confidence that the votes we're casting will deliver the results that we desire? So, with a weakening of institutions, there's also that erosion of trust. And I think that the strengthening of public institutions has to be taken very seriously. The government has to be willing to respect the separation of powers, respect the press, stand aside from the electoral process. All those things are things that, regardless of the sincerity of policy and the quality of the drafting of policy on the technical end, it cannot deliver results through weak institutions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madam Ozofu. Indeed, we need strong institution. Reform is not a sprint, but a marathon. Let me come over to you, Dr. Wilson. We're currently experiencing some, global shifts, and the global economic environment is increasingly becoming unpredictable, with issues like pandemic, oil prices, volatility, climate pressure, geopolitical conflicts. It has disrupted a lot of economies. How can Nigeria design reforms that are resilient enough to withstand these external shocks so that our progress is not constantly derailed?
Yeah, and you know how to build that resilience? I'll just say be proactive. So I think we need to stop reacting to shocks after they have happened. We need to anticipate and prepare and know that shocks will always come. You don't need to be an economist to know that Nigeria's next major shock is likely going to come from falling oil price or disruption to the global supply chain with wars and political instability happening across different parts. You don't need to be an economist to know that. Just looking at oil price, the trajectory of oil price so far in 2025, we have about 177 days in which oil prices have been reported so far this year, from January 1st till yesterday, September 9th. And this is perhaps excluding weekends. So 177 days. Out of that, 131 days of that 177 days, oil prices have been lower than $75 per barrel, which is what we have in our budget benchmark for 2025. So you can already see that we're facing revenue pressures. And this is not me even talking about oil production, which is still far below what we have in the budget. So, and it's funny because no matter how well diversified your economy is, if you have manufacturing contributing 50% to your GDP, to employment, and the likes, a well-diversified economy, you still need external buffers. You need your sovereign wealth funds, in excess crude oil account, and all of those things. And it's interesting because if you just take us back to, let me take you back to 2008, 2008, 2009, we used to have the excess crude oil account. We had about a balance of about $20 billion in that account. We used to have external reserves. External reserves was something, was around $62 billion, 62. Monetary policy rate was 6%. FDIs, we had about $1 billion coming into the economy. But right now, no one is talking about excess crude oil accounts anymore in Nigeria. Our sovereign wealth fund, I'm 100% sure, still below $10 billion. Five is not even up to $5 billion, from the last time I checked. And our reserves at 41, yes, we've made progress in the last couple of months to grow reserves, to 41 billion, but it's still very, very small compared to the size of the economy now. And FX, foreign exchange rates, 1,500 or thereabout, monetary policy rate at 27.5%. I don't think this is not normal. We've gotten used to the fact that things are hard, and it just feels like we're a bit comfortable with the way things are. We used to have monetary policy rate at 6%. Now it's 27.5%. So my point is, as a country, your best days cannot be in the past. especially given that we're still a developing country. We should not be having 3.1, 3.2% GDP growth, and we're releasing press statements and we're happy. We're having the same GDP growth as a country like the US, the largest economy in the world, that is really advanced and have reached their, you could argue that they've reached their peak at some point, and we've not. So I think we don't need to be comfortable with little progress that we're making to say reserves has improved. Yes, fine. Kudos to the central bank. They've done a good job. But we need to do more. At least, let's even go back to where we were in 2008 by boosting reserves to about over $60 billion. And imagine that import, back then used to be about 5 trillion or thereabouts. And now it's over 30 trillion. And our reserves is still 41 billion. So my point here is we must build reserves, build external buffers. And there's a lot more work that we need to do that, both from the fiscal and monetary policy, and even trade and industrial policy angles. Now, the second point is on diversification, which, if you know me, you heard me speak, I've spoken a lot about it, many times. I don't think we need an external shock before we start making policies, right? We don't need Trump to impose tariff on Nigeria before we think of Nigeria first. We start, putting up Nigeria first policy and all of that. We've had made in Nigeria, agenda over the years. What's happened to it? But when Trump acted, all of a sudden we remember that we needed to put Nigeria first. And so I think we have to, be very proactive in whether it's in terms of policies, implementation, designing programs to support our businesses. Something like Nigeria First, made in Nigeria, it has to be mainstream into every government policies and agenda, in a way that the budget, for instance, has to be very deliberate to support local production. Our budget should not just be about how do we pay salaries and, everybody's talking about debts and all of that. But the key question these days, if you look at other countries, budget is no longer a fiscal policy document. It is an industrial policy tool. And that's where we need to shift. How is our budget creating jobs? How is our budget supporting small businesses, in key industries? I think that's where we need to start moving the conversation towards. It's like we've given the president the authority to say, look, we have $55 trillion to spend. Spend it for us in the right way. That's how we need to think of a budget. And it has to trickle down to these small micro businesses. Let me just conclude by saying that the world is more volatile now more than ever. There's, the impact of the pandemic, wars, commodity prices. And if we don't build resilience over time, no matter the gains we make, it's still not going to be sustainable.
Thank you very much, Dr. Wilson. Indeed, as a country, our best days cannot be in the past, and we must make plans for the future and be proactive. Distinguished audience from whichever platform you're joining, please note that you can engage. I can see comment from Idahosa. Celebrating small wins is a way to drive transformation. When things are done well, they should be acknowledged. Thank you very much, Idahosa. Please, you can also engage. You can leave your questions, comments on whatever platform you're joining us from, and it will be collated and shared with our distinguished panelists that are on the call this afternoon. Madam Ozofu, you did speak about weak institution as one of the risks that reform faces, and I would love to stay on that for a bit, because every reform agenda would face certain risks, be it political resistance or weak institutions, like you mentioned, or a lack of policy continuity. What do you see as the greatest threats to Nigeria's current reform drive, and what decisive actions must be prioritized now to mitigate them and ensure that our best days are not behind us?
Thank you again for the question. I think that the biggest threat is the trust deficit. And it is because we have been here, we've done that. Every government comes with promises. And have failed to deliver. That has been the track record. So I think people will wonder why is it different this time? How do we know we can trust the government? Nigerians have been criticized for being apathetic. The people don't care. They've given up. They don't expect anything from government. They don't even see the point of voting. So that sort of attitude. But it's not an attitude that people are born with. I actually believe that we all start off hopeful, but learn to live, have learned to live with disappointment, which is unfortunate. So I think that there is work to be done on both sides. I think it behoves the government to recognize the trust deficit and not deny it or criticize it, but accept that it grew out of the legacy of failed governments of the past, and then work to remedy that. Like I said, sincerity of purpose. So it is easy to draft a nice paper for reform. You can even start implementing it, but you're going to see it through. And like Dr. Wilson said, how are you spending the money? How are you spending this money to deliver the reform? So the government needs to understand that government is a service and you do need to be accountable for it. And I think on the part of the people need to not give up. If we give up and we stop engaging, then we've given, impunity free rein. We have to continue engaging, regardless of the challenges, regardless of whether it seems we're making progress. We've seen progress in certain respects. We don't always see it, but I think that if you stop engaging, you do not see any progress or impact at all. So some of the legislative and regulatory reforms we've seen have come from active engagement by the private sector. So that's what I would say. I think also the trust deficit can be cured with proper communication. Like I said before, why do we need this reform? Where is it leading us to? Broken down in a way that the average Nigerian can understand. When I say the average Nigerian, I'm not talking about people like Dr. Wilson with PhDs or like me with a law degree. I think we need to be talking about people on the streets, the market woman, the person in the village on the farm. Those are the people that need to understand why they're feeling this pain. If they understand it and if there's sincerity of implementation, then that deals with the trust deficit risk. There's also the weak institutions risk. We need to build resilient institutions. We need to build institutions where regulatory bodies, the courts, and the enforcement agencies are strong and they're independent. We need to, first of all, I think we need to have a consensus that we need these institutions. It works for everybody, including the people in government. It is you make the most impact where you set high standards and you're held to them. I think any government wants to be remembered well. I don't think anybody wants to come into any public office and leave with a bad legacy. So I think there's actually a genuine personal interest to be remembered well. But you do that by surrounding yourself with people based on their merit and letting them do their work. So I think that maybe in terms of the weak institutions, we need to ensure that our courts are independent in relation to how appointments are made and how decisions are given and what's coming out of the courts. I think we also need to ensure that there is confidence in our electoral process, because again, to the point of what is the point of me voting, we can't afford to have people stay away on the days of election. We need people to engage, but they will only engage if they sincerely believed that their vote counted. I think the other thing is the cost, the social cost of reform, and I've referred to it as well, that we all need to bear this pain together. So we all benefit together. It can't be that certain people are thrown into poverty. They literally cannot afford to feed, to live in decent accommodation, or to educate and empower the kids, while others, suffer a minor inconvenience of higher prices. There will always be inequality in any society, even the United States we just referred to, but there has to be cushioning for the lower rung. There has to be, we have to work against disproportionately impacting the poorest of society. Where we implement social safety nets, we need to ensure that that is done properly, and that the aid is getting to those who need it, and for whom it is structured. So there has to be transparency about how it is done. Again, I think sequencing, I think Dr. Wilson referred to that, sequencing of reform is important. You can't correct all Nigerians' problems in one administration, and you cannot correct everything in 5 years. So even our theme is ambitious, but what we want is to stay the course, to stay focused and continue with these implementations while dealing with any lapses so far in implementation, so that we can actually see it through to the end. I think maybe the final point I'll make on this is the subnationals. I think we need to focus more. In Nigeria, I don't know why, but we have always looked right to the man at the top and believed that the president is all powerful and he can do all this. That certainly is the view of at the grassroots. But I think people need to understand that at the state level, there is so much that can be unlocked there's so much untapped potential when you look at internally generated revenue of states. If we hold all our state leaders accountable and they know that they have a mandate to make each state economically viable, then you can imagine what investments will go into infrastructure, into intrastate competitiveness, into trying to attract businesses to various states. Lagos is saturated, it can barely cope with its population, but there's so many other states that offer the same opportunities if they could package themselves and sell the value proposition for investing in the states. And so, for instance, in the summit, our second plenary on the opening day will focus on one Nigeria, many markets, driving subnational competitiveness. And the conversation, which we hope will include several of our governors, will really showcase how, yes, we are one country, but we are many markets, and there is an opportunity at the subnational level, and we should begin to see more competitiveness among states for domestic and foreign investment to drive growth. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ma. Indeed, many citizens feel elated from policy conversations. And some have seen them as elite debates with little impact on their realities. Dr. Wilson, what mechanism should the NESG 31 put in place to ensure that insights and recommendations generated at the summit are translated into policies and programs that ordinary Nigerians can actually feel?
Yeah, thank you. And one thing that excites me about the summit is that even the way the summit has been structured, I've been part of the summit technical committee in the last over 10 years now. And so when we plan the summit and the sessions, one of the things we try as much as possible to do across all the conversation is to ensure that we're speaking to the realities of the everyday Nigerian. We're also having to put measures in place to ensure that summit delivers impact, and it's not just about conversation. And I can give certain examples as to what we've achieved in the past. I remember in the 2015 summit or so, where we had a model and we predicted that Nigeria was going to enter into a recession the next year, and we did actually. That was what basically birthed the ERGP, the Economic Recovery and Growth Plan. In fact, the next summit, we had to, say that we cannot get out of this recession, by just doing nothing. We needed to have a plan. And in fact, if you notice, 2018, 2017, 2018, 2019, those are days when we had some reasonable growth numbers, for Nigeria. And part of it was due to the fact that there was some commitment from both the private sector and the public sector, to be able to make some of these shifts that were needed at the time. Within that time also, the summit was very instrumental in forming the Presidential Enabling Business Environment Council, which, in fact, in that summit in 2017, if I'm not mistaken, we brought the former Prime Minister of Georgia, Mr. Nika Gilari or so, to come to the summit, and he presented practical steps that he took, to address some of these ease of doing business or doing business concerns in his country, where he, implemented a policy, no means yes. If you apply for an approval, if you don't get a response within certain days, go ahead with what you want to do. It means the government has given you an approval if they don't respond. So government institutions started, waking up. And he came to the summit. So in fact, at that summit, meetings were held, with the vice president, and that's what led to the creation of the, Presidential Enabling Business Environment Council and the Secretariat as well. The last or current medium-term development plan, these are things that were, all born out of the summit itself. So I think the summit is not just about conversations. I mean, conversations are important, but it goes beyond that to look at, what specific measures can be taken, across the different areas of our economy to ensure that, citizens' lives are improved and to ensure that we have a strong private sector. So the summit in itself is structured to be an accountability platform. We will start with a presentation on the state of the economy. Where are we now? What progress have we made in the last couple of years? What are the things that we need to do to move forward? We're launching a series of reports and engagements, and the funny thing is, it just doesn't end at the summit, right? All year round, the NESG continues to discuss with government on different areas, whether it's the central bank, the ministries, to say these are the things we need to do. Of course, not all of them will be taken, but we hope, we will keep advocating and pushing and ensure that, some of these critical reforms are made in consideration with the cost and how they can be better managed, to ensure that everyone, feels the positive impact of reforms, or at least the larger majority.
Indeed, the accountability partner role that we play at the NESG is one of such mechanism and framework that we have put in place to ensure that the output translates into real impact. Thank you very much, Dr. Wilson. Dear audience, please still keep your questions coming. I can see some of your questions already coming, and very shortly I will move into the audience question. But let me come back to Madam Ozofu. As we look ahead to the next 31 in October, expectations are really, really building high. From your role as, the technical subcommittee coach here, and shaping the, committee's work, what will make this summit stand out from previous ones? And how will it ensure that it's not just another dialogue, but a truly action-oriented turning point?
Okay, thank you for that question. I think that, yes, the question you've asked is something we always ask ourselves when we begin the ideation around the summit, to ensure that that the summit is impactful, that it is dealing with the issues of today, but with a long-term mindset, that we are also evaluating not just the immediate past summit, but the summits of the past, to see what has worked well, what needs to be improved, and how we take it forward. I think for us, we need to ensure, and we try to ensure, that we have clarity of focus. So for instance, for NEST 31, which is this year, we were clear that we wanted to build on the conversations and the partnerships that were fostered in NEST 30 last year, that we were not restarting conversations, but we were rather following them through, continuing them, looking at what was said last year, at the solutions that were proposed last year, seeing what has been implemented so far, and being able to analyze that, and then also seeing where nothing has been done and where we need to pick up those conversations again. Last year, we focused on collaborative action for growth and competitiveness and stability. And then, so that's why this year we're focusing on the reform imperative, being very mindful of the reforms that have been implemented by this government since 2023, and examining how we build a prosperous and inclusive Nigeria for the future. I think that the reason why the words prosperous and then the word inclusive are very key to us at this time is because we need to build an economy that delivers prosperity to people, that people understand that they don't need to leave in order to make a way and get ahead in life. They don't need to leave the country. Also, it has to be inclusive. It cannot be an economy that only delivers for the privileged few or half of the population. It has to be one that delivers all the way from the top to the bottom. And so that's what we're hoping that we will build on in NEST 31. Our three pillars, I think, also really speak to this. They are resilience, reform, results. In order to see reforms through, we recognize that we must build a resilient economy, one that, like we've already said in the course of this program, is not vulnerable, cannot be, and sorry, I think there's an echo, is not as vulnerable as we have been in the past to global shocks. Like Dr. Wilson said, there are trends that you can see that predict, certain shocks that lie ahead. We can plan better for that. And so that's what the resilience speaks to. The reform is the fact that we recognize that reform is needed, and we recognize that it has to be sustained as a tool to building this prosperous and inclusive economy. And then results are the fact that we have to measure the impact of reform. We have to look for those results. We can't just, it's not reform for reform's sake, but what exactly are we delivering in the reforms? One very key feature of NEST, all the NEST summits, NEST 31 included, is shared ownership. It is a handshake between the government and the private sector, civil society, development partners, subnational governments. And we, as I said earlier, we ensure that we create the avenues for all these stakeholders to meet, to be able to address the issues that they are best suited to, and to be able to get feedback from participants in the summit. I think that's the unique value proposition of the Nigerian Economic Summit. I think also another thing we seek to deliver is the link between the summit and policy reform and framework, and how we take the results or the outcome of the discussion at the Senate and deliver it to the government as something they can use to build up on existing government programs and future programs as well. And maybe just to mention that the work of the Nigerian Economic Summit Group is not just within the summit, but it goes on year round. There is constant engagement with the executive, with the legislature on framing and delivering policy reform. So hopefully I have answered the question as to what.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you very much, Madam Ozofu. Indeed, we are working all around the clock, even after summit, to ensure that this is delivered. And you did mention something about us being one country, but with many markets. Dr. Wilson, we know that reform often looks different from Lagos to Kano, Port Harcourt to Maiduguri. How can we design reform frameworks that respects our diversity as a country, yet still moves us forward as this one nation?
I would say that diversity is strength, and there was one time I said I used to push something that says we need to understand the realities of our backyard and understand that it is that diversity that will make us stronger, as we go forward as a country, rather than what we see on social media today, where people are, diverting and trying to take positions and say this is better than this and all of that. That will not get us anywhere. So even in the planning process itself, I think we have to understand that, well, look, Nigeria is made up of different tribes, different people, different states with different endowments, different opportunities. And so policies, therefore, must take that into consideration, as opposed to this idea of one size fits all approach where it's been done elsewhere. Let's just bring it and implement in Nigeria. I think we've had that case, on several occasions. But this time, I think going forward, even how we conceive ideas, if you look at that policy process, how we engage stakeholders, and the kind of stakeholders we engage, not just people with ties who can come into a meeting, and then, share their learned perspective, but also people who are on the field, people who are running businesses, people who are, marginalized. How do we ensure that in designing, say, a tax policy, for instance, how do we ensure that they are included in that process? And I think that's where we need to be a bit more sensitive, and engage even more, beyond the summit. So we've had several sessions at the NESG recently, the Hamilton project, where we're going across different states, in the country to engage people on development, understanding development, as it were in Nigeria, understanding what it takes to develop, understanding how they can also be part of that process. I think more of such initiatives are needed, not just even at the federal level, even within states. For instance, how do people contribute to, say, the planning process of the state itself, the budget of the states? Do people even have a say? How many of these people attend these budget hearings? How many of them are even aware of the budget hearings? I saw a recent survey on something about the AFCFTA, for instance, and they ask entrepreneurs, if they're aware of it. And it will shock you that so many people are not aware of the African Continental Free Trade Area Agreement. And this is something that, has been touted as, the way forward for Nigeria in terms of trade, building industrial capacity. But the people that will produce that product, the people that will export, many of them don't know much about the deal. So how do we then start having sessions, micro sessions across the country to ensure that these small business owners are carried along? And I think that's basically the way forward, or that's the first step, to ensuring that reform is inclusive, carry people along. When you're planning your reform, ideas and strategy and all that, communication should be a big part of the budget. And communication is not just on X, LinkedIn, Facebook and the likes. It's also on having grassroots programs. I don't think we have that much of those anymore. So I think that's where we need to start shifting towards. And yeah, just engage the people a lot more and ensure that their perspectives are included or are well acknowledged within the policy process and the reform document that eventually comes up.
Thank you very much, Dr. Wilson. Let me ask one final question to Madam Ozofu before I switch to the audience, because I see quite a number of questions coming in from, very engaged audience. Madam Ozofu, you spoke about consensus and the need for us to build consensus. And I know that one of the things that NES 31 aims to do is to build this consensus. What would true consensus between government, businesses, and citizens look like? And in your opinion, how close are we to achieving it?
Okay, I think that true consensus will be We'll first start with engagement. It means that the government need to hear from the people as to what are the pain points. I don't know what it's like to be in government, but I've heard that it's actually possible that the things we see every day that are clearly issues that people are dealing with do not always translate to what's being fed to our leaders. And so sometimes they're actually quite oblivious as to some issues that people are dealing with that they're unaware of. So I think when we say we're engaging, there has to be true engagement. Sometimes we have public dialogue on certain maybe drafts legislation. And when you see who really was engaged, sometimes you don't even really get a chance to, you don't hear about it, or the room is half empty. So I think that the government needs to make a more concerted effort to have these sorts of town halls and be fed in unfiltered information as to the pain points. I think then we need to also, another level of engagement will be then working with the right stakeholders to design government policy so that there's input not just from government, but also from the right technical expertise within the private sector, from international partners, from various stakeholders. And then I think in the course of implementing, we need to think about impact on people. How should we implement it? Should we phase it? How do we cushion the effect? So all that, I think, will help to build consensus. And then transparency, so reporting, and periodic checks as to health checks. How are we doing with our reform? Do we need to backtrack? Do we need to change our implementation strategy? Do we need to fix anything? I think that if we had this sort of collaborative process to the most important of reforms, and not just federal level, but as I said, subnationals as well, I think it will help to build that consensus. It will help with stakeholder buy-in. It will help with people understanding why and how, the end goal. I think overall it will deal with the trust deficit, which I said was the biggest risk for the success of the reform implementations. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madam Ozofu. I would now switch to the audience question, and I will start with the first question that came from Abdul Majid Adamu. And it's asking, Dr. Wilson, this question is directed at you. How do we move Nigeria from lamentation to actually creating a Nigeria that works through creating strong institutions? We know that we need strong institutions and we need to be proactive rather than reactive. But how do we move Nigeria from lamentation to actually creating a Nigeria that works?
Yes, I think it's a very interesting question. And I think part of the solution is the engagement process we've talked about. And in cases where change has happened, most times it's come from pressure. So I don't think the lamentation is just a lamentation, as it were. I think it's a way of sending a signal that things can be done in a better way. And in fact, we've seen how pressure emerged, not just even from, people speaking out, using different platforms, but also how people engage government in a way that they express their dissatisfaction with certain policies. And I think that's one way, that we can drive change as well. And the summit provides that opportunity for us. Like I said, some of the progress we've seen in the last couple of years came through that dialogue process where people are saying, look, we just can't continue like this. So we have to keep saying that. We have to keep letting people know that we're performing below potential and that we must make the move, to achieve that goal that we've set for ourselves. I mean, for instance, we have a target to achieve a $1 trillion, economy by 2030, which is just 5 years from now. One of the things we're doing at the summit is to say, look, what are the sectors that can get us there? How many jobs do we need to create to deliver this $1 trillion economy? What areas of our economy should be the priority? What area should we look at? And all of these will be tabled out, at the summit. And beyond the summit, even having sessions as we do at the NESG, hosting these dialogue platforms. All of this, in addition to the voices of the citizens, the different stakeholders, I think are like collective voices to pressure key political actors to say, look, we have to move forward. So, in a way, I don't think it's all about lamentation. I think there is a message underneath it. If everyone keeps quiet, I mean, our former chairman, Felicia Phillips, he always says this, that if nobody is talking, and like you always say, everybody is talking. If nobody is talking, only God knows where Nigeria would have been today. And so that voice, I think, is still very important. But there's still a lot of work going on in terms of doing the research. I mean, at this year's summit, one of the things we're doing is to launch a report on jobs and productivity. And I don't think we've talked about it, extensively in Nigeria. Where will the jobs come from? How can we create better jobs for Nigerians? I don't think that is a big part of the conversation within the government circles. Maybe a few skills training programs have been, enacted and are being implemented. But how do we look at jobs from a development perspective? That's something we're, introducing at this year's summit. Is something unique. How do we address our productivity challenges? What are the right areas to put forward? So these are the things we're going to launch at the summit, and beyond launching, following up, having one-on-one sessions with with the relevant agencies and ministries to see how we can follow up. In terms of the general and broad institutional design, how do we create better institutions? I think a lot of people have advocated. I follow Professor Olua Jakaye's work, who has, preached a lot more on the developmental state approach. They need to create an interface for public-private partnerships. And I think, looking at the successes we've had, across the world in terms of the East Asian countries, I think that model looks more like it for us, given where we are and where we need to be at the moment. Yeah. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Wilson. The next question is from Nathaniel Srufaransin, and I'll direct that to Madam Ozofu because she spoke about subnationals. Reforms and policies are necessities. The federal government and subnationals need to align and collaborate. Disruption from both would impact businesses negatively to a large extent. How can we push for this, narrative at the summit? I think that's what the person is trying to say. How do we push this narrative at summit to make sure that both the federal government and subnational understand the importance of collaboration?
Okay, thank you. Yes, like I said, one of the plenary sessions we have to kick off the summit is a subnational session, the One Nigeria, Many Markets. So I think that by focusing on the opportunities that exist at the subnational level in the framework of a national summit that involves not just the subnationals, but also the federal, many members of the federal executive and legislature. We have that level of collaboration where the federal and the state actors are, examining this issue together. So I think that, and it's not just that, there are other sessions as well in the summit. And in addition to that, one of the things that came out of our planning process for this summit was the fact that we actually need a subnational summit, some focus on the subnational opportunities, the support that the subnationals need to really kick off their own economies, and how that support can come from both federal government apparatus as well as private sector. So I think it's woven into the summit sessions. There are some sessions that are specifically earmarked for the subnational discussion. We hope to have a standalone event with maybe the Ministry of Trade. So there are other things we are going to explore within and afterwards at the summit to ensure that this subnational discussion follows through. And it's not just a feature of this summit, it is a feature that we've had in previous summits. We've always had governors come to discuss what they've been able to achieve on that subnational level and the challenges they face and how we can explore different areas together. There are also certain conversations such as education and healthcare where the state governments play a key role in delivering primary healthcare and in delivering basic education. So we have sessions on those as well, where we will have resource persons from both private sector, subnational, federal levels, examining how to better deliver on these areas where the subnationals play, I think I may say, even a stronger role than the federal in delivering value and quality to the population. I hope that has answered the question.
Yeah, thank you very much. I see quite a number of questions, but sadly, I am looking at the time as well. So I will just take two more, and I'm hoping that these last two I pick are ladies, because the first two questions I picked were from guys. So let's hope that Osama Haze is a lady. And I will direct that question to you, Dr. Wilson. What is actually a strong institution? Do institutions run themselves? Shouldn't we be talking about how to build people with high moral values that can make institutions function well?
Yes, thank you for this question. And I don't think that's from a lady. If I
Yeah, sadly.
but all the same, I think, when we're talking about institutions that are, accountable, institutions that deliver their mandate, institutions that deliver public value. And, like Mark Moore would say, that, public value is what the people values and what is of value to the people. And and they're two different things, and politicians understand it very well. And in fact, in Nigeria, they tend to play more towards what the people values. So if the people values 1,000 naira, they give them 1,000 naira. But what is of value to the people, is a bit more broader and long term, maybe education, healthcare, and the likes. And so you see that play out during elections. They prioritize what you value more than what is of value to you, just so they can get what the short term. It's short term in nature. But that said, I think having to deliver public value is something that is of importance, and that's the essence of that institution. Is an institution that can deliver that in a way that you are able to take into consideration the cost. So we're talking about cost efficiency, judicious use of resources, transparency, accountability, and many other metrics that people have used to describe strong institutions. And I think, should we be talking about how to build people with high moral values? And yeah, I think this is a very important part of the process of building institutions, where what do people value in terms of the morals? Are people are moved by immediate gains, at the expense of long-term gains? And I think the way we've structured our institution, even though there are a lot of reforms, whether it's in terms of the police, all of the relevant agencies that have to do with ease of doing business, but you still see those elements that people are more interested in themselves. And so that's why I think that national reorientation or national orientation agencies, I think the work has to be done at that level, where there's a very strong message from the government itself that, look, this is where we think the country should head. Having that engagement across people in different heads of agencies, and putting in mechanisms that can checkmate these institutions and these people within these institutions. And I think that's one thing. How do we even assess whether an agency is performing, for instance. Is it just about what they bring to the coffers in terms of revenue? How are they delivering on their mandate? Who checks that? I remember Pebec used to do these institutional rankings across the country and say which institutions comply the most, which institutions do the. But for some time now, we've not seen that ranking. And I think something like that are very important. At some point we had cases where some institutions tend to be even more powerful than they don't respond to letters. Even if you rank them as the bottom, they don't really care because you don't pay their salaries. So I think the way I think of it is it has to come from the top himself, from the president himself, to see how to redesign institutions in a way that they are held accountable for their actions. The other actors like the National Assembly, the judiciary, also very important in that process. But even if you then go down to the subnational levels as well. But I think ultimately, with the way Nigeria is, I think citizens' pressure will play a much bigger role, particularly in nudging government to make some of these institutional reforms that we need. Not just citizens, but even pressure from the private sector, business member organizations, and stakeholders. We don't have to get to a reflection point for them to see that we need that institutional redesign. And in fact, because I work on industrial policy, one of the biggest problem that I've seen is that the way Nigerian institutions and the state is organized and structured, we're not structured to handle micro industrial policy that to support MSMEs. That's why you see a lot of times we focus on the big things like export processing zones, SPZs and the likes that tend to favor some of the big manufacturing firms. But when it comes to giving loans to small businesses, monitoring how they perform, I give you 10 billion naira today. How do you use it? Have you exported to XYZ countries? How many have you exported? Have you built capacity? Monitoring and following up. I don't think our institutions are designed to follow up on those micro industrial policy, which is very essential and which is even the driver of some of the East Asian countries that we point to in terms of the success of industrial policy. So I think it's a big problem that we have to deal with, but maybe a lot more pressure from citizens and key stakeholders is what we need to change the process, because I don't think, to be honest, that government will reform itself just by itself because it wants to reform itself.
Thank you very much, Dr. Wilson. Indeed, government cannot reform itself by itself. The last question I will take for you, Madam Ozofu, is from Shitu. How can the Nigerian government effectively manage and influence the diverse behaviors of its citizens, including skeptical individuals and civil servants, to foster collective commitments toward achieving national development goals?
I think that messaging is important, but apart from messaging, I think, like I've been saying, sincerity of purpose and intent. So the government needs to say something and they need to live it out. I remember listening to the Minister of Interior a few weeks ago saying how that when he came in to his ministry, he met a backlog of more than 200,000 passports. And it wasn't that the machine was fault or anything. The backlog was there. And then they gave a mandate to clear that backlog in 2 weeks. And I remember him emphasizing that with the same equipment and the same staff, they didn't hire a new team, they didn't bring in a consultant. With the same people, they cleared the backlog. So that shows you that. So I'm addressing the civil servant point. It is what you ask of your employee that you will get. If employees do not show up at work and they get paid at the end of the month, there's no incentive to show. If they are unproductive and it has no consequence, then why should they stress themselves to be productive? So I think that in terms of what the government can do to effectively manage and influence behavior of the civil servant is that the minister and then the PAMSEC and all those in charge need to send the right message, and there needs to be reward and consequence for proper behavior. In terms of the people, again, I think it's messaging. Let me just take one that always, there's a pet peeve for me in Lagos, is sanitation. If people are dumping refuse on the road or the corner side of the road, and the government is saying nothing, then that means it's okay. If it is not okay, do we have jingles out? Do we have advertisements that sending this message? Again, the people that are dumping refuse on the street are not me. I don't need anybody to tell me it's wrong. But there are many people that do it because one, either they have no means, they can't pay for proper disposal, they're poor. So they will dump it anywhere they can. And then there's no messaging to even say it's wrong. So we need to educate people, but it takes me to the point of education. If you deliberately do not educate your population, people are at the most basic level of intellectual capacity. They cannot figure out these things for themselves. They think it's normal. So we do need to build our educational sector. We have 20 million out of school children in the world. We're one of the countries, the highest number of out of school children. That is a very bad reputation to have. You cannot fix behavior if you do not educate your people. So education, first of all, basic education has to be something that cuts across the entire 200 plus million of us. So if we all have some level of education, we can think a bit more rationally. And then the messaging has to be there consistently to influence behavior. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madam Ozofu. I will ask one final question to both of you, and I would be very happy if you keep it to just 1 minute. When we meet again at NEST 32 in 2026, what one or two concrete outcomes would you hope to point to as evidence that reforms are truly delivering? Let me start with Wilson.
Well, this is unexpected. I don't know, but I'll just say that we shouldn't have 133 million poor people again. We should have a commitment to assist the poor and the vulnerable. We should have made progress in assisting the poor and the vulnerable. We should have a very clear and deliberate agenda for jobs and raising productivity. And we should be on the way to implementing that. I wanted to say that we should reduce maybe poverty or the number of poor people to 50 million, but that would be too much. But at least see reasonable progress in the reduction of the number of poor people we have in the country. And in fact, there's a list of macro indicators on exports, for instance. Manufactured exports should not be 3%, by this time next year. It should be something around 6 to 7 to 8%. Manufacturing share of GDP increasing significantly, and so many other indicators that we use to measure development in general. So that's what I would like to see, and that our
Thank you
budget
very much.
is reformed in a way that favors
Okay.
people. Yeah.
Thank you very much,
Okay.
Dr. Wilson. Madam Ozofu.
Yeah. I would say inflation, the inflation rate, we need to, it needs to be put in check. We have to deliver on reducing inflation so people can afford to feed. I think that is the most critical in terms of where the people feel the pain every day. And if we can deal with that, then I think we're well on our way. I think that it would be really good to see improvements in security as well, because that has an impact on the agricultural sector. It has an impact on logistics and manufacturing. It has an impact ultimately on economic growth. I think we cannot continue with this level of insecurity in the country. So yes, inflation and insecurity. If we've seen improvements by next year, I think we've made a lot of progress.
Thank you very much, Madam Ozofu. Thank you very much, Dr. Wilson, for your amazing insights. And thank you to our very, very engaged audience that have engaged us this afternoon. We thank each and every one of you. You can still take advantage of registering for the summit because it's in October, and you've heard from our distinguished panelists why you should be there. So I invite you to visit www.nesgroup.org/31. Visit there and register to be part of the conversation. Today we have held that reforms are not just about passing policies, but about building systems that deliver real values to citizens. We've explored how to balance short-term pains with long-term gains, how to safeguard reforms from the different risks that it's susceptible to, and how the Nigerian Economic Summit 31 aims to be, that platform where commitment translates into action. As we move towards October, let's carry the spirit of urgency and collaboration forward. NESG 31 will deliver more than just a conversation. It will be a moment for us to reset, a moment for us to reimagine, and for us to all act. On behalf of the Nigerian Economic Summit Group, I want to say thank you very much to each and every one of you for joining us this afternoon. Please stay engaged, spread the word, and most importantly, let's work together to ensure that this reform turn into real impact that make Nigeria's better days ahead of us and not behind us. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.